For decades, Jim Walton was the quietest billionaire in America's richest family, a man who let others take the spotlight while he worked from the shadows. But behind the glossy image of Walmart's unstoppable empire was a reality few dared to discuss, a power struggle that reached right into the Walton family's core. Jim, the youngest son of Walmart founder Sam Walton, was never the flamboyant face of the company like his brother Rob or the late Helen Walton's carefully curated public legacy. He preferred to avoid headlines, skipping the press circuits and charity galas that his siblings embraced. And yet, when decisions about Walmart's future came to the table, the stakes were not measured in millions, but in billions. Jim's voice carried a quiet authority that could tilt the balance. But then, whispers began to leak. Boardroom disagreements, disputes over succession plans, family meetings that ended in slammed doors and cold stares. Insiders claimed that as Walmart faced an era of unprecedented retail disruption, the family no longer spoke in unison. Some wanted Walmart to aggressively expand into tech and e-commerce. Others feared straying too far from Sam Walton's original vision. And at the center of these conflicts, Jim Walton, the man once described as the family's peacemaker. It wasn't just business. Sources close to the family described a tension that bled into their private lives. Family gatherings where some siblings sat at opposite ends of the table, legal advisors subtly inserted into personal conversations, and questions over who would hold the reins when the next generation took over. Jim, who had inherited a staggering fortune and a powerful seat on Walmart's board, suddenly found himself accused by some relatives of consolidating influence, using his low profile as cover for decisive moves that shaped the company's strategy. His defenders said he was the only one keeping the family from imploding entirely. His critics whispered that he was playing a long game, securing control in a way that even Sam Walton himself might not have foreseen. Then came a decision that set off a shockwave, one that some called the trigger for the most intense Walton family dispute in decades. A move involving billions of dollars, international expansion, and the possibility of shifting Walmart's DNA forever. The public saw none of this. To the outside world, Walmart remained a fortress of wealth, with Jim Walton still on its board and still ranked among the richest people on earth. But to those inside the circle, the cracks were widening, and the question was no longer just about business. It was about legacy, loyalty, and whether blood could survive the weight of a trillion-dollar empire. They once stood at the very top, but what happened next? Join the Hidden Billionaires to uncover their story. Long before Jim Walton's name appeared on Forbes lists, and before Walmart became the behemoth that reshaped global retail, he was simply Jimmy, the youngest child in a modest Arkansas family whose ambitions far outgrew the small-town streets of Bentonville. Jim was born on the 7th of June, 1948, into the household of Sam and Helen Walton. At the time, his father was still hustling to make a name for himself in the retail business, running a Ben Franklin variety store and dreaming of a new kind of shopping experience that would revolutionize the way Americans bought goods. Jim's early life was nothing like the billionaire luxury he would later inherit. The Waltons lived frugally, not because they were forced to. Sam believed that thrift was both a moral value and a competitive advantage. As the youngest of 4 children, alongside siblings Rob, Alice, and John, Jim often found himself observing more than speaking. Family friends later recalled that while the older siblings were more assertive, Jim had a quiet, watchful demeanor. He wasn't the loudest in the room, but he remembered everything. This habit of listening before acting would become a defining feature of his leadership style decades later. Growing up in Bentonville in the 1952nd meant a small-town rhythm. Long summer days playing baseball, fishing trips with his father, and Sunday mornings at church. But behind this seemingly idyllic childhood was an unspoken understanding every Walton child was expected to work. At just 8 years old, Jim was helping stock shelves, sweep floors, and observe his father's meticulous attention to customers. Sam Walton would often quiz his children about what they noticed in the store, which products were selling fastest, which customers seemed most satisfied. To Sam, These were not idle questions. They were training exercises for a future in retail dominance. Jim excelled academically, particularly in math, and had a natural affinity for numbers. While his older brothers gravitated toward more public roles in sports or business leadership, Jim quietly built a reputation as the numbers man of the family. At Bentonville High School, he became an accomplished student athlete, playing football as a quarterback, but his true strengths lay in problem solving and strategic thinking. When it came time for college, Jim enrolled at the University of Arkansas, earning a degree in business administration and marketing. Yet even in college, he kept a low profile compared to his siblings. Friends remember him as friendly but private, with a dry sense of humor and a competitive streak that appeared only when the stakes were high. After graduation in 1971, Jim could have walked straight into a cushy executive role at Walmart. Instead, Sam insisted his son start outside the main empire. Jim joined Walton Enterprises, the family's holding company, before moving to Walton's bank, Arvest, in 1972. This was no mere side project. Sam wanted his youngest son to understand financial systems inside and out, believing that controlling capital was as important as running stores. Jim thrived in banking. At Arvest, he learned how to evaluate risk, assess markets, and negotiate deals. This experience sharpened his ability to think long term, a skill that would later influence Walmart's expansion strategies. By the time he returned to Walmart in the 1982nd, Jim wasn't just another heir. He was a disciplined strategist with a deep understanding of the financial machinery that fueled the world's largest retailer. But perhaps the most significant influence from his upbringing wasn't the business training, it was the family ethos. Sam Walton's lessons were drilled into all his children. Stay humble, work harder than everyone else, and never forget the customer. Jim absorbed these principles completely, but he also learned something else from being the youngest: how to navigate family dynamics without being consumed by them. This skill would be tested in ways he could never have imagined when the Walton Empire grew to a scale even Sam might not have predicted, and when internal disagreements began to threaten the unity of America's richest family. By the time Jim Walton formally stepped into the Walmart orbit in the early 1982nd, the company was no longer a regional player, it was a rapidly expanding national giant. Walmart's model of everyday low prices was crushing competitors, and its founder, Sam Walton, had become a folk hero in the American business world. But even with Walmart's meteoric rise, the family understood that maintaining control required careful positioning of each sibling in the empire's complex machinery. Jim's early career had been forged in the crucible of banking at Arvest. When he joined Walmart's board in 2005, after his brother John's sudden death in a plane crash, it wasn't because he had lobbied for it. The family needed someone they trusted implicitly, someone who could read balance sheets as fluently as others read headlines. Jim was that person. But his influence began long before his official board seat. Even during his years running Arvest Bank and overseeing Walton Enterprises, Jim was part of the inner circle shaping Walmart's financial strategy. He helped guide decisions on investments, acquisitions, and how to quietly but aggressively expand the company's reach without drawing the kind of media scrutiny that came with more public-facing executives. Colleagues described him as the man who said little but decided a lot. In board meetings, he rarely spoke first. Instead, he listened, analyzed, and delivered concise but weighty input that often shifted the direction of discussions. This understated style became one of his most potent weapons. People underestimated how much power he actually wielded. Walmart's global expansion into markets like Mexico, China, and the UK coincided with Jim's growing presence in family strategy sessions. While others debated marketing campaigns or store layouts, Jim zeroed in on operational efficiency and financial leverage. He was instrumental in pushing for Walmart's embrace of advanced supply chain systems, which allowed the company to dominate competitors not just through price, but through sheer logistical superiority. At the same time, he maintained his role at Arvest, transforming it into one of the largest regional banks in the United States. This dual role, banking executive and Walmart power broker, gave him a unique vantage point over both the family's retail empire and its financial fortress. Few outside the Walton bloodline realized just how much influence Jim had over both. Media coverage of the Waltons often focused on Alice Walton's art patronage or Rob Walton's leadership as chairman, but behind the scenes, Jim was building his own reputation as the family's financial anchor. When Forbes began listing him among the richest Americans in the 1,992nd, his net worth, largely tied to Walmart stock, quietly soared into the tens of billions. Despite his vast fortune, Jim maintained the Walton tradition of avoiding ostentatious displays of wealth. He lived in Arkansas, far from the coastal billionaire enclaves, and drove himself to work. This low-key persona kept him off the scandal radar, but it also allowed him to maneuver in ways that more public billionaires could not. By the early 2002nd, Jim was not just a figure in the Walton dynasty, he was a central architect of its future. His fingerprints were on major strategic moves, from international expansions to investments in technology aimed at countering Amazon's growing threat. Those close to the family say that Jim was often the voice advocating for cautious but decisive action, a balance between preserving Walmart's DNA and evolving to survive in an unforgiving retail landscape. At the peak of Walmart's dominance, when the company topped the Fortune 500 list year after year, and the Walton family collectively became the wealthiest in America, Jim's influence was undeniable. Yet, it was also at this peak that fault lines began to appear not in Walmart's revenue streams, but in the family's vision for the future. Some wanted Walmart to double down on brick-and-mortar dominance, others wanted to reinvent it as a tech-powered retail hybrid. The question of who would lead this transformation and how much power each sibling should have was about to ignite one of the most delicate and closely guarded family disputes in corporate America. For decades, Jim Walton had managed to do what few billionaires could, amass staggering wealth and influence without attracting scandalous headlines. But as Walmart's dominance came under siege from e-commerce rivals, global controversies, and internal disagreements, the shield of quiet anonymity began to crack. The first tremors came from outside. Walmart faced a wave of criticism over labor practices, wages, and working conditions in its vast network of stores. Media exposes painted an unflattering picture of the retail giant, and although Jim wasn't the public face of the company, as a board member and major shareholder, his name inevitably became tied to the backlash. Activists questioned why the Waltons, with their combined fortune exceeding $200 billion, weren't doing more to improve the lives of Walmart's lowest-paid workers. Inside the company, the pressure was even greater. Disagreements began to spill into private conversations among the siblings. Some saw the need for aggressive digital investment to keep pace with Amazon. Others feared diluting Walmart's tried-and-true model. Jim, known for his financial conservatism, reportedly clashed with those who wanted to move faster and risk more capital on untested ventures. The most contentious moments came during closed-door family meetings. Leaked accounts from insiders described scenes of tense exchanges, brothers and sisters interrupting each other, advisors stepping in to mediate, and Jim at the center of heated debates about Walmart's expansion into high-risk markets. While he had always been seen as the family's stabilizer, some accused him of quietly consolidating power through his dual roles at Walmart and Arvest, creating a financial leverage that could give him disproportionate influence over both corporate and family decisions. Then came a moment that turned the quiet rumblings into a visible fracture. Walmart's board approved a major international expansion strategy involving billions of dollars, sparking a rift among shareholders and even within the Walton bloodline. Critics of the move claimed it was pushed through with the support of Jim and a small inner circle, while other family members felt sidelined. The fallout was intense. Trust began to erode, and family dinners reportedly became rare, short, and strained. The public never saw the full extent of the conflict, but small signs began to emerge. Jim started reducing his public appearances, even for business events where his presence was expected. Financial filings showed subtle shifts in his holdings, interpreted by some as a protective maneuver in anticipation of further disputes. On a personal level, the scrutiny weighed heavily. For a man who had built his career on staying out of the spotlight, being cast, even quietly, as the linchpin in a family power struggle was uncomfortable. Friends say Jim became even more guarded, rarely discussing business matters outside a small trusted circle. Reputation-wise, the Walton name still commanded respect, but the myth of total unity had been broken. Behind closed doors, the question was no longer just, how do we protect Walmart, but who controls its destiny? And whether Jim Walton was preserving the legacy or reshaping it for his own vision became the unspoken question that no one dared to ask him directly. After the intense family disputes and boardroom battles that shook the Walton dynasty, Jim Walton took a step back from the frenetic spotlight that so often defined the world's wealthiest families. While Walmart remained a retail giant under the watchful eyes of the board, Jim's presence became more measured, less public speeches, fewer corporate events, and a quieter focus on long-term family strategy. This retreat, however, wasn't a sign of surrender or fading influence. Rather, it was a calculated move by Jim to rebuild trust within the family and to consolidate his role as the steady financial hand behind the empire. Sources close to the family describe this period as Jim's afterglow years, a time of reflection, rebuilding, and reorienting priorities. Instead of grand gestures or flashy business moves, Jim embraced a more discreet form of leadership. He expanded his involvement in Walton Enterprises and Arvest Bank, using these platforms to nurture new investments that diversified the family's portfolio beyond retail. Technology startups, green energy ventures, and regional infrastructure projects quietly became areas where Jim's fingerprints were found. Away from the public eye, Jim also focused on strengthening family governance. After years of simmering tension, he helped orchestrate a more formal structure for decision-making among Walton heirs, including the creation of councils and committees aimed at reducing conflict and ensuring smoother transitions of power. While these changes weren't widely publicized, insiders note that they were crucial for preserving the family's legacy. Jim's lifestyle during this period remained grounded. He chose to stay in Arkansas, maintaining his roots rather than relocating to the typical billionaire enclaves of New York or California. He lived modestly compared to other billionaires, and while he continued philanthropy through various family foundations, he shied away from the spotlight that came with charitable celebrity. For many observers, Jim's post-conflict years revealed a man who valued stability over flashiness, long-term legacy over short-term gain. Yet, even as he kept a low profile, rumors persisted about the next generation of Waltons. Would Jim's children carry forward his vision, or would new divisions emerge as the empire passed into younger hands? What surprises many is how quietly influential Jim remains. While the media often fixates on the more visible Waltons, Jim's behind-the-scenes work continues to shape not only Walmart's future, but also the vast financial empire the family controls. His ability to adapt, retreat, and rebuild speaks to a resilience few billionaires have mastered. Jim Walton's story is not just one of personal success, but also a story about family, how fortune and legacy intertwine, and how the next generation steps into an empire shaped by their forebears. Jim is married to Lynn McNabb Walton, and together they have 4 children. Unlike the media frenzy that surrounds some billionaire heirs, the Walton children have largely maintained a low profile, avoiding the tabloid spotlight while quietly preparing to inherit the massive responsibilities of their family's fortune. The Waltons have long understood that the transfer of wealth is more than a financial transaction. It's a passing of a mantle, a continuation of values, and often the root of both unity and discord. Jim's approach to this delicate phase has been cautious and deliberate. Sources suggest he has invested heavily in educating his children, not only in business acumen, but in the nuanced dynamics of family governance and philanthropy. The younger Waltons have started to appear in public roles, primarily through philanthropic initiatives and positions in family foundations. They show a mix of interests. Some lean toward environmental causes, others toward education and community development. This diversification reflects Jim's own philosophy of branching out beyond retail and finance steering the family's influence towards social impact. But legacy isn't without its shadows. The very scale of the Walton wealth, estimated at over $60 billion, attributed to Jim alone, raises questions about how future generations will manage such vast resources. Will they preserve the family's original vision of Walmart as a company grounded in community and thrift, or will they steer it into new industries and uncharted territories? Inside the family, there are whispers of cautious optimism mixed with concern. As new leaders emerge, the balance between tradition and innovation becomes increasingly delicate. Jim, with his long experience as the family's financial anchor, remains a guiding figure, but the growing ambitions of younger Waltons signal that a new chapter is unfolding, one that could redefine not only Walmart, but the Walton legacy itself. Jim Walton's legacy is deeply entwined with one of the most transformative business stories of the 20th and 21st centuries, the rise of Walmart, from a humble variety store to the largest retailer in the world. Yet, his impact is often less visible than that of his siblings or the company's founder, Sam Walton. Instead, Jim's influence has been subtle but foundational, shaping the financial and strategic backbone that enabled Walmart's sustained dominance. As a steward of the family fortune and a key figure on Walmart's board, Jim helped to institutionalize practices that turned the company into a global powerhouse. His focus on financial prudence, operational efficiency, and long-term planning ensured Walmart's ability to weather retail's shifting tides, including the e-commerce revolution. Beyond Walmart, Jim's legacy extends into regional banking and philanthropy. Under his leadership, Arvis Bank grew into a significant financial institution in the American Midwest, supporting countless local businesses and communities. This dual legacy retail giant and community banker reflects a nuanced understanding of wealth's role in both global and local economies. Experts and business historians view Jim as an archetype of the modern billionaire who wields influence not through flashy headlines but through steady, behind-the-scenes leadership. He embodies the Walton family ethos of humility, hard work, and a commitment to legacy preservation. Yet, Jim's story also serves as a cautionary tale about the complexities of family wealth. The internal struggles and shifting dynamics within the Walton family underscore how vast fortunes can both unite and divide. His life illustrates the delicate balance between personal ambition, family loyalty, and the responsibility that comes with immense wealth. Today, universities and institutions that study corporate governance and family business often cite the Waltons' experience as a case study in managing succession, legacy, and philanthropy at an unprecedented scale. Jim Walton's role in shaping these lessons cements his place not only in the annals of American business, but also in the ongoing conversation about wealth and power in modern society. Jim Walton's journey through wealth, power, and family legacy is a testament to the complex nature of being one of the world's richest individuals. Unlike the larger-than-life billionaire archetypes splashed across headlines, Jim carved a path defined by quiet influence, strategic patience, and a deep commitment to family values. His story teaches us that immense wealth is not only about accumulation, but also about stewardship, the careful management of legacy, relationships, and vision across generations. Jim's ability to balance the weight of his family's fortune while navigating internal disputes speaks to a resilience and wisdom that often goes unseen in the spotlight-driven world of billionaires. But his life also reminds us of the personal costs behind the public success. The strains within the Walton family, the battles fought behind closed doors, and the sacrifices made to keep a trillion-dollar empire intact highlight the price that comes with standing at the very top. Was it worth it? For Jim Walton, the answer seems to lie in continuity, in preserving his family's influence while quietly adapting to a changing world. As the next generation steps forward, the true test of his legacy will be whether those values endure. If you found this story eye-opening, subscribe and stay tuned for more hidden truths from the world's richest.